Okay, so I'm going to show you how to divide a whole number by a decimal. I first wanted to start by talking about this equation here, 14 divided by 3, which is two whole numbers. And when we divide 14 by 3, we get 4 remainder 2. And what that means is I have 14 circles here. You're trying to see how many groups of 3 you can make, right? So here's one group of 3. Here's another group of 3. Here's another group of 3. And here's another group of 3. So we can make 4 complete groups of 3, and we have 2 whole things left over. That's why it's your remainder. Okay, so when we divide with decimals like you see here, you're not going to use remainders anymore. We're going to be writing remainders as decimals. So you can't put a remainder inside of a decimal. The good news is to actually do this type of equation is very similar to the long division that we've been learning with whole numbers. Okay, so I'm going to do this one first, and then I have another example. This is 5.76 or 5 and 76 hundredths divided by the whole number 16. Okay, so you should first think about, what this means. You're trying to figure out how many groups of 16 fit into 5.76. Well, if you think about that, if we only have 5 whole things, we can't make a group of 16, right? You can't make any complete group, so your answer is going to be a decimal. Okay, so now I'm going to go through how you would actually solve this. All right, so you still want to list out your multiples of the divisor, which is 16 here. Okay, so 16 times 1, 16 times 2, 16 times 3. And I actually paused the video there so you didn't have to watch me do all of that. But I just completed my chart with all my multiples of the divisor, 16 up to 9. Okay, and now you set up the problem almost the same way. So your divisor out here. And if you're using the box method like we've been working on, you set it up with a 5 here, 7, 6, they each get their own place. Now the important part is, and really the only one of the only new things here is, there's a decimal here, right here. And when you're dividing a decimal by a whole number, the decimal will be in the same place in your quotient or your answer. So all the digits that go up here, doesn't really matter what the digits end up being right now. The decimal, for sure, is going to be right here. I'm going to make it nice and big so we remember that. Okay, and now you go through this problem pretty much the same way. All right, you check to see how many times 16 goes into each digit. So 16 goes into 5 0 times. You multiply those two and subtract. That 5 still goes to the next place to create a new number. So now you have 57. You're trying to figure out how many times 16 goes into 57. Well, if we look at our chart here, let's see if we go 4 times 16, that's too far, so it would be 3. And now you multiply those two numbers, 16 and 3, which we already have over here, is 48, and subtract. All right, 57 minus 48. Well, you can't do that. You have to borrow there. 17 minus 8 is 9. And that 9, again, you bring on up to the next place. Okay, now you have to see how many times 16 goes into 96. Well, if you look at our chart, it exactly goes into 96 exactly 6 times. We land right on 96. So that means when you multiply those two, you get 96, and there's a 0 there. That means you're done. So the answer you would write as 0.36. You would say that as 36 hundredths. Remember, this is not even one whole number. Okay, this is less than 1. Okay, now this one's a little bit more challenging, and you'll see why towards the end. All the same stuff. You started out all the same way, right? So I'm going to make my list of multiples of 45 up to 9. Hey, look at that. They magically appeared. Got my list of multiples up to 9, 45 times 9. So now I'm going to set it up again much the same way, just got to remember that decimal there. So divisor out there, I'll need 4, 3, 1, 1. Don't forget the decimal, make sure it matches exactly where it is in the original expression. Right, and remember, if the decimal is there in the question, it's going to be there in your final answer. So do that first so you don't remember or don't forget to add that decimal. Okay, so now we're doing the same stuff, right? How many times does 45 go into 4? Well, not even close to 1 time at all. Okay, so 45 times 0 is 0. You subtract to find the difference and take that 4 up to the next place and we get 43. And now you got to ask yourself the same question, how many times does 45 go into 43? Well, now that's closer, but it still does not go into it at even 1 whole time. Okay, so we multiply that again. 45 times 0 is 0. And subtract. 43 minus 0 is 43. And you take all of these digits, this whole number, and add it to this digit up here. I'm going to kind of rewrite that. So we need 4, 3, and 1. I'm going to rewrite that so I have more space. Okay, now you're going to try to see how many times does 45 go into 431. Well, if we look at our list over here, that's a big number, and it's going to go all the way 9 times, would get us to 405. Okay, now you subtract to find the difference. You're going to have to borrow there, and the answer would be 26. Now again, I'm going to erase that 1. We're going to take these 2, 6 and combine it with a 1 to get 261. I'm just going to rewrite that so it's a little bit more clear. Okay, and again, we're going to check our list. How many times does 45 now go into 261? Well, if we look over here, 45 times 5 is 225. That's pretty close. And if we go to the next one, we go too far, all the way to 270. So we need 45 goes into 261 5 times. Multiply those. 45 times 5 is 225. And again, subtract to find the difference. All right, so we can't do that yet. We're going to have to borrow. So this will turn into an 11, and this will turn into a 5. And now I can subtract. 11 minus 5 is 6, and 5 minus 2 is 3. So now we have 36. And the question is, in the past, if this was a whole number, this would become your remainder. But remember, you cannot put a remainder inside of a decimal. A decimal is kind of like pretty much already a remainder. So you can't just write remainder 36. All right. So what you do now, since we're in decimal places, you can actually put a 0 at the end of all decimals and it doesn't change its value. Okay. So I'm going to pretty much add a 0 to this place here. Okay. And I'm going to bring this 306 or these 36 up here to make 360. Okay. And now we repeat the same steps. We see how many times does 45 go into 360? Well, if we look at our chart, we're in luck. 45 times 8 is exactly 360. So whenever that happens, when it's exactly what you're looking for, that means you're done, right? So 45 goes into 368 times. And if you subtract those, of course, they're the same number, so you would get 0. So once you get to a final 0, that means you're done. You don't need to add a 0 here in the next place. So your final answer would be, and you don't need to write these zeros, your final answer would be 9 and 58 hundredths.